Ankur says, hi, Mehran, 19 male from India here. I have severe HOCD, and it is to the point that it's almost convincing me, but my awareness is what that is keeping me alive and in hope. Well, you got to go a little bit deeper into why some of you get to a point that you may think, falsely so, that you're being convinced. For that, we need to go a little bit into neuroscience. And while I'm polishing on my knowledge about this particular topic that I want to talk to you about, but because of this question, I find it necessary to share with you the little I know without having explored it further to know how to better explain it to you. So I'm going to explain it to you in a crude way, but I hope that will be enough for now until I make a specific video on that topic. You see, many of these obsessions and compulsions, and in your case, HOCD, which is a subset of OCD, many of these obsessions and compulsions in OCD topic, OCD disorder, which many people have it in different ways and different subsets, you go for that level of awe feeling, like the compulsion, whatever your obsession is, whether it's pure awe, as Dr. Philipson explains, pure awe being an OCD without a physical action. It's all thoughts and intrusive thoughts and all these things, HOCD being one of them. That awe moment that, for example, if you have an obsession of washing your hands, that your hands are dirty, it's a compulsion would be to go wash your hands. And when you do wash your hands to do the compulsion, what do you get? You get, I'm clean now. I feel fine. Now, that very moment that you say, I'm clean now, there is dopamine secreted because you get that feeling of comfort, good, something good is happening. And that dopamine is addictive. As you know, in midbrain, basal ganglia, striatum, there are three circles right on top of each other. One is the goal finding center, which is, for example, the situation between obsession and compulsion. My hands are dirty, I gotta wash it. That compulsion to me is that goal finding. I gotta wash it, that's my goal. But then at the same time, when you stimulate that first circle of goal finding, washing your hands, you're also stimulating the second circle, which is right on top of it, which is the reward center. The reward center is the dopamine. When you wash your hands, you feel, you get the reward. The dopamine comes in and you say, feel good. Now, so you were just thinking about doing the compulsion, but you were also unknowingly stimulating the reward center, which secretes the dopamine, which dopamine is addictive. So unknowingly, by doing every compulsion, you're getting yourself addicted to the dopamine, to the reward center actions and stimulations. Funny thing is that every time that happens, you're at the same time with that compulsion cycle, you're not just stimulating the reward center, the dopamine that becomes addictive, you're also stimulating the habit center, the third center in the striatum. They're all connected, which means after a bunch of time doing the compulsion, you're no longer doing it for compulsion, just you're doing it to get the dopamine. And after hundreds and hundreds of times of doing that and getting addicted to dopamine, you're no longer doing it just for compulsion or dopamine. You're actually doing it without knowing why. It's because it's become your habit, because you've been stimulating the habit. That's why OCD of any kind subsets constantly go on and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. This is why you need to nip it in the bud and try to educate yourself about OCD and OCD subset, in your case, HOCD, and with knowledge to avoid this process of going from compulsion to the dopamine to the habit center and so on. Now, having said that, I want to bring your attention to this bit that I want to explain to you. When you're in the reward center, the dopamine cycle, which every time you do the compulsion, you get the dopamine. Listen to me. Dopamine receptors to get dopamine are programmed for survival. They're programmed to know that if you stimulate the pleasure centers, the is a pleasure, often and hard, the receptors for dopamine die. If you stimulate something that brings pleasure to you, this is actually a discussion about difference between pleasure and happiness, which that is what I make the video on. But it pertains, this particular can help you why you're being convinced, so you can understand, and that knowledge frees you from the fact that this is all bullshit. I'm not going to be convinced in anything because it's up to my choice and my preference, not up to the suggestions that the brain or other people may make. So getting back, meanwhile, back in the ranch, every time that you use something for pleasure, such as drugs or whatever else it may be, you are stimulating the dopamine center. And when you stimulate the receptors for dopamine, pleasure, so much and so hard and so continuously, the receptors die. In order for them not to die, they have a down regulator. Listen to this. So down regulator is when they actually become less available. So they can actually absorb less of the pleasure to react and secrete the dopamine, which means the less receptors to receive and feel the pleasure to cause dopamine to be secreted, they diminish. And when they diminish, what do you have to do to get the same effect? You got to do more. Because when there's so many receptors available and pleasure comes in, so much dopamine is secreted and you get high, whatever it is, any kind of pleasure. Now, in this case, is a drug, but it could be anything, any pleasure. It works the same way. And when you get high, and so often and so high, the receptors, dopamine receptors, they downregulate so they won't die. Because if they're stimulated often and hard, they die. For them to survive, they become restricted. They become less available to be stimulated. When it becomes less available to be stimulated, you need more of that pleasure to get the same effect, because there's not much receptors available to produce that dopamine that you need to feel pleasure and get high. This is why it keeps reducing and reducing. Every time you do more and more, they again want to survive, reduce and reduce, to the point that you get addicted because you're constantly pushing that pleasure, whatever it may be, drug or whatever, to get the same effect. And that's when you get addicted. When you get addicted, then that's when you feel you're being convinced, because you need that high and you can't get it by going through intrusive thoughts in your brain and satisfying yourself. Don't know that it's okay. I just tested myself. I just got assurances. I tried and saw, no, I'm okay. All that, you need to do more and more and more. And the more you do and occupy your brain with all these thought patterns, the more eventually you become convinced in your brain, while your biology is not convinced, because the biology is not going to change. You're just going to make it through your brain power to do something that is not his biology. All because you have been constantly, instead of using Dr. Schwartz 4-step and ignoring this shit and rewiring your brain, you've been entertaining with these assurances and assurances and assurances to get that high, to get that dopamine, and then they downregulate. You got to do more assurances, and eventually you constantly get your brain into that, and then you can't think of anything else but that. That's when you think you're being convinced. That's the fuck up the whole thing, and that's because most people don't really know shit about what's happening in their brain, and they start believing what the brain says. Well, if it wasn't that, it wouldn't be there all the time. Well, you train the brain for these thoughts to be there all the time because of this particular section that I just explained. Which, mind you, I think it was pretty good explanation. I may not do that other video because I just did. But that other video is about happiness and pleasure, which is about dopamine and serotonin, which is two different things, and explains why people who seek pleasure to bring happiness, mistakenly thinking pleasure is prelude to happiness, they actually never reach happiness, and they become addicted to something that is never going to give them that homeostasis or that psychological security that they're seeking. So that's for another time, another story. I hope that helps you out to understand why you're being convinced and learn to deal with the HOCD the way that we describe in all the videos and Dr. Schwartz 4 steps, and watch the many experts such as Dr. Philipson and Dr. Jan Wainert and Dr. Schwartz and their work. And I have this other video that I've already suggested to all of you to enjoy, which explains the work of the neuroscientists and neurosurgeons such as Dr. Sperry, Dr. Leibit, Dr. Penfield, Dr. Owen, and their findings, and how you can simply see that you're not the brain, brain is not you. So all these are just a conditioning that through the glitch of the brain you're subjected to, and you got to know how to deal with it, rewire yourself by using the brilliance experiments of these surgeons and these psychologists, psychotherapists, such as Dr. Schwartz and Dr. Philipson and so on, and then learn about their lectures and help yourself to rewire your brain rather than being subjected to a glitch of a brain that is in its disorder glitches, which many end up feeling so miserable and takes them a while to get out. Knowledge will help you to get out of it.